In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear brakes, pads and rotors on this Toyota Sienna. These will be located behind your rear wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is safely raise and support the vehicle so the rear wheels are off the ground. Once you've completed that, we'll be removing the wheel. To do that, remove all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and then you can pull the wheel off of here. Now that we have the wheel off, the next thing we'll do is pay attention to our brake caliper. For this, we want to make sure that we push back our caliper piston enough that we'll be able to remove the caliper from the area. We'll give it a close inspection and set that aside. Use a small pry bar for this. We're going to come inside of the slot, gently pry up against the braking rotor inside that area. Once you do have movement from that caliper, we'll be making our way to our caliper slider mounting bolts. To remove your caliper slider mounting bolts, we're going to be using a 14mm. We'll loosen the top one, but leave it in just a couple threads. Inspect your mounting hardware as you remove it. Replace it as necessary. Once you have the caliper off of there, you need to give it a thorough inspection. If you see any fluid coming out of this dust boot, that means the seal on the caliper is bad and you have to replace the caliper. This one looks fine. We'll set it aside. Now it's time to remove our brake pads. Now it's time to remove the caliper bracket. For this, you're going to find that you have 2 17mm headed mounting bolts holding it in place. You know what to do. We'll loosen the top bolt, leave it in just a couple threads, and then fully remove the other bolt. A quick inspection of the caliper bracket and we'll set this aside. Let's move along to the outside of the brake rotor. If you were to look at the face, you're going to find that you have an adjustment port cover on here. This is just a rubber cover. We'll use a small pick or screwdriver and pop that out of place. A quick inspection of that cover, you will be reusing it. Now the next thing we're going to do is remove the brake rotor. If you found you had a hard time removing this, it's typically due to the fact that the emergency brake shoes, which are on the inside, are hitting up against the rotor. If that's the case, you need to carefully turn the rotor until the port is aligned with the adjustment down along the bottom area here. Once it's properly aligned, you could use a skinny flathead screwdriver, come directly inside here, and make the proper D-adjustment to be able to slide the rotor off. There it is, friend. Once you have that brake rotor off of there, you need to go ahead and give the emergency brake shoes a quick inspection, the hardware, and then we also need to clean the hub mating surface where the brand new rotor will sit. We can do that using a wire brush. Apply some anti-seize to your mating surface. Just move this around. When installing your brake rotor, you want to pay attention to the adjustment port. Looking at your wheel bearing, you can see that you do have a notch for that area to align with. Once we're sure that that's properly aligned, we'll continue on with one of our original lug nuts to hold the rotor in place while we continue. Before we continue putting any more of the brakes together, we're going to adjust the emergency brake shoes. To do this, you want to make sure you have your adjustment port facing pretty much straight down. That's where you're going to find access to your adjustment cog. We'll continue on with a flat blade screwdriver or adjustment tool and just make adjustments as necessary. What we're trying to do here is be able to turn the rotor without any resistance, but you do want to hear a tiny bit amount of drag. Right there, I have it adjusted, so I can't turn this at all. We're going to de-adjust this a couple of clicks. Now as I spin it, I can hear a tiny bit of drag, but there's definitely no resistance. Something to pay attention to here is that if you have too much drag, that's going to create friction. Friction creates heat, causing things to expand, and your brakes might lock up. Once you're properly adjusted, continue on with your adjustment port cover. Let's start taking apart the caliper bracket by removing each of the bracket tins. We'll set these aside for recycling. With those out of the way, we'll continue on to our two caliper slider pins. For these, you want to take hold of the pin and the bracket, give the pin a light twist, and pull it out of the boot. Once you do have it removed, it's important to make sure that you clean and inspect the entire thing. You want to make sure the shaft area isn't rotted, which could restrict movement. Other than that, we'll also be paying attention up close to my glove fingers here. That is where the boot will sit. You want to make sure that's clean as well. There we are, I've got that pin cleaned. Now we'll continue on to having a quick look at the caliper slider boot. We want to make sure it's still soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Once you've inspected that, the next thing we want to do is clean the port that leads into the caliper bracket. When doing so, you never want to use any sort of solvent because it could potentially cause swelling to the boot and damage. We'll just take a clean rag with a screwdriver and gently bring it into that tubed area. A quick spin around a couple times here. We can remove that. As you can tell, we removed the grease and debris from that area. One more quick inspection, and we'll repeat the process on the opposite side of the caliper bracket. That pin looks good. Inspect that boot. Continue on with high temperature caliper lubricant. Lubricate the entire shaft of each one of your caliper slider pins, making sure that you make your way all the way up into the groove closest to my gloved fingers there. By adding lubricant inside of that groove, it helps prevent any moisture or debris from making its way inside the port. Double check to make sure both of these move freely and the boot's completely seated all the way around. Moving from the slider pins, we can continue on to the areas of the bracket where those 4 tins will sit. To clean these, you can just use a wire brush. If you were to use some sort of sanding disc, you want to be extremely careful not to take off too much meat of the bracket, in which case you're going to have some pad noise moving around. We'll give this area a close inspection, double check to make sure there's no raised areas, complete the same process on the opposite side of the caliper bracket. With those areas cleaned, we'll be continuing with our high temperature caliper lubricant. Lubricate each one of these 4 areas, 2 on each side of the caliper bracket. Now it's time to install our caliper bracket tins. We'll be paying attention to the orientation of them. What we need to look at is this little hooped area that comes across like this. Ensure that when you're installing your caliper bracket tins, you have the areas that protrude out facing out and away from where the rotor would sit, which is directly along the center of that caliper bracket. Otherwise, you're going to have some serious brake noise. I can see I have that area protruding outward, and I also have the spring area, so when I slide the pad in, it's going to be able to press this down. Get the other one in here. This one's the opposite tin. A quick inspection on this side. Repeat the process on the opposite side of the caliper bracket. Let's get this over to the vehicle. When you reinstall a caliper bracket, you want to make sure that you clean the threads of your two mounting bolts and apply some blue thread locker. Start in both of your mounting bolts by hand, snug them up, and then torque those to 65 foot-pounds. Let's take hold of our two brake pads here. You need to install your wear indicator. The wear indicator will go on your inboard pad on the top ear. Get that little indicator here. Now when we go to install this, you want to make sure that you have this portion of it facing towards the inboard side, which is essentially where the rotor would be. When your brake pad gets worn low enough, it might hit up against this, causing a squealing noise, indicating it's time to replace your brakes again. Let's install our brake pads. Ensure you have them in the proper orientation, and we'll slide these in. Now we can install the outboard pad. Double check to make sure each one of the pads can move around inside of the bracket. If you have to use a hammer to tap it in and it can't move, you're going to have a braking issue. Before you reinstall the caliper onto the pads and the caliper bracket, apply some high temperature lubricant onto the caliper piston itself and along the backside of each of these ears, essentially the contact points that will hit up against the brake pads. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Now we can take the caliper, we'll put it in place. Once you do have it up here, you want to pay attention to the flex hose itself. Ensure that it's not twisted like a pigtail. That can cause brake fluid restriction. After that, we'll continue on with our brake caliper slider mounting bolts. You can see I applied a thin amount of blue thread locker here. We'll start them in, snug them up, torque those to 27 foot-pounds. Double check to make sure everything's properly secured. Let's get this lug nut off of here. We can reinstall the wheel. We'll get the wheel in place, start on all 5 of our 21mm lug nuts. After that, bottom them out. Get the wheel back on the ground and torque each of these lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we showed you how to install one side of your rear brakes. At this point, you want to go over to the other side of the vehicle and complete the same exact process. After that, and everything's torqued, make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm, check your brake fluid, and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.